So today I thought we'd just take a look at the tomatoes and we compare the early tomatoes, which are now all outside, with the main crop tomatoes that are in the polytunnel and the main crop tomatoes that are at home, and just look at the difference between the two. Because superficially these look pretty good. You know, they're a reasonable height, they've got reasonable sort of trusses on them, but you know, there's no leaf curl particularly. But I don't think they just look anywhere near as kind of rich green as the ones outside. And you know, there's not as many trusses low down as the ones outside. And I think that's largely because it was just so hot. So we got not quite as good germination. You know, these plants, they just didn't grow quite as successfully as the ones outside. Now it's also interesting outside to note that the ones near the wall are doing way better than the ones kind of further down the garden that don't have that kind of re-radiated heat and shelter from the wall. So that's kind of the overview. And then if we look at the tumblers and compare the tumblers outside, which are looking, you know, reasonably good, but not, I don't think, quite as good as the red profusion outside, which generally come a couple of weeks earlier than the tumblers. But then take a look at the tumblers that were sown a month later than those early ones, and of course they're not ready yet, but just look at how, you know, how great and healthy they're looking by comparison with the early ones. So you know, you've got to remember that those early ones, they were planted, some of them, most of them actually, into that dodgy compost that meant that they had no root systems. So they didn't really develop as much leaf as I would like to have seen, and they've kind of relied on just liquid feed since then. But yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I think the lesson is, you know, the tomatoes outside are doing great and the tomatoes in the polytunnel are doing okay. And the early tomatoes that I started in this polytunnel and then moved outside as soon as I possibly could have done really well outside. And so that's just, you know, one of these things about how useful really is a polytunnel. And I see it in summer, and I see it as mainly as a hedge really, you know, against blight and against poor weather conditions. And of course, growing outside is also a hedge against it being too hot in summer in the polytunnel. So anyway, that's just a quick overview of the comparison between the indoor and the outdoor tomatoes and the early and the main crop tomatoes.